Hi, everyone. Right now, we're going to talk about part 2 of chapter 11. We're going to go and talk about windows and fabrics and different types of window treatments. So let's get started, shall we? So let me share my screen with y'all. And here we go. So earlier that we had discussed that we were talked about all sorts of various flooring and wall treatments. And now we're going to focus right now on what is on a ceiling, windows, and fabrics. So there's a lot to cover here. So let's just get this to full slideshow mode and get this on, get this going. So welcome to part 2 of chapter 11, ceiling, windows, and window treatments and fabrics. Okay, today we're going to try to identify the different kind of ceiling treatments that we have, the various types, as well as talk about different types of windows and window treatments. We're going to be able to identify various textures and finishes and some of their characteristics and how they're used in interior spaces. Now, ceilings are one of the most ignored yet critical areas in an interior space. They help shape the space. Light and shadow interact with the ceiling surfaces, so we can do some amazing things in design with ceilings. Vertical windows draw our eyes up to the ceiling, so there's ways we can manipulate a room to make the ceiling look longer or higher, taller, or shorter. Horizontal lines, like we learned in Elements of Design, can draw the eye across the ceiling, giving an illusion of a lower, cozy, human-scaled horizon, which brings that ceiling down. Next, we're going to look at the various types of ceiling. These are just the most common. We're looking at some trends. Beams. Right now, we're seeing lots of beams, ceiling beams, and I love these beams. Here is a wood faux beam or a regular beam. Now, these beams that look wood, they can come in a styrofoam finish type of a beam, and they can also come in real wood. And I've used them where they're actually styrofoam with faux finishes with different wood grains and different wood finishes, and they look fabulous. And the wonderful part about that is they don't hold a lot of weight. So if you're going to put ceiling beams in and maybe don't have the structural weight of the ceiling, a great way to get that look is get a faux beam that is faux finished with a plaster that looks like wood. So this is a great look, kind of giving that a more rustic vibe. We also have various beams that can be done at an angle with various different lines. So here you see a different type of a ceiling treatment using beams, completely different than this. And then we have beams here, a more distressed beam used both horizontally and then a vertical beam. And so that was probably for a larger ceiling span, and maybe they needed those vertical beams to pull electric from. But here's an interesting look, more like a ladder vibe. Now, we talked about the different types of lighting. One of the lighting was coves, but in order to have cove lighting, you have to have a cove ceiling, right? So these cove ceilings are parts of wall, and they have a little nook in that area, leaving a gap. And that is that gap, that little cove in there that outlines the ceiling or ceiling treatment. And we put in our accent lighting in that cove. Here you see the cove that just does not have the lighting inside, but a little trim piece, and they've done an accent paint, and they just have their general lighting inside the cove. And then here we have the cove kind of at an angle in a slanted ceiling with a ceiling fan. So you can have very many different looks within a coved type ceiling treatment. So beams, coves, those are probably the two most popular ceiling treatments. Now, next, this is more of a traditional type of ceiling treatment, and it's called coffered ceiling. A lot of times you'll hear this term in more historical type of architecture, but a coffer ceiling often reminds me of a waffle, where it has that negative space, like it's been punched in there. So here you see basically theoretically millwork that is in vertical and horizontal elements that create these square shapes. It's very detailed with some ambient lighting in there. Here they have that coffer ceiling. Once again, it's pushed in, so it kind of has that negative, positive, like a waffle, but we have a totally different shape, something a little bit more transitional and modern. Then over here, this is more of our traditional coffers that you would find in a French palace, perhaps, and there have a lot of architectural detail. Many of these detail motifs, such as the rosettes, canthus leaves, these are made often out of porcelain, or not porcelain, excuse me, plaster, those plaster molds. In the more antiquity days and back in the French Louis XVI, they were made out of real wood molding. So we've utilized plaster to create a far more decorative coffer ceiling. But each one of these are coffered, and remember, it's kind of like pushing in like a waffle iron. Now, a tray is a treatment where it is pushed also. It's like a part of the ceiling's pushed in. And a lot of times it could be even at an angle, but you'll see that there's a face here. Okay, a little bit different than that cove ceiling where it's a little gap. So that tray, they push in, creating a step effect. And often you'll see you can have a double tray where you can do accent lighting or accent colors. You can have a single tray with molding. This is a little angled. Here we have a tray, then they faux finished the ceiling treatment and put down their task lighting and added the molding. Very traditional, bringing in the color from the ceiling into the upholstered fabric. So each are a tray. We find this a lot. I've noticed when I was in Florida, all of the bedrooms had tray ceilings, which is pretty expensive and adds a lot of architectural detail. So does coffers. Any architectural treatment that you put on your ceilings will add cost to the ceiling, especially if you're pushing into the ceiling, because you have to make sure you have space above the roof structure. They call it the plintham. So you have to make sure there's space in there to push into that ceiling area. Next, we have, which is the most popular type of ceiling in commercial, it's called a drop ceiling. And a lot of times this might be referred to as a dropped soffit. And basically a drop ceiling is the opposite of a tray, where we're actually framing down some a frame, and we cover it with the drywall, and we create a more dropped effect. This adds intimacy. It can outline a space. Like in this instance, this would be perfect for maybe a reception desk, and people would come in, and that dropped ceiling really acts as the cap to the entire space, outlining it. Here you can have drop ceilings layered to give a cool contemporary vibe, or a typical drop soffit could be just right over your bathroom. We see this a lot, so it houses your task lighting. And a lot of times these dropped ceilings have a purpose, especially in the kitchen. They may house plumbing or electrical in that dropped soffit or ceiling treatment. This is a lot less expensive to do than pushing in a tray where you're pushing it in. You don't need as much space. This creates intimacy as well. I use drop ceilings and soffits all the time over booths or banquettes in a restaurant to create the space and outline it and add intimacy. Now, plaster. I did mention that they would use plaster molds. Plaster can be formed at any shape or size. So plaster here in the coffer ceiling, this is plaster, but it is used to create a coffer-like effect, where here the plasters and moldings, creating all different shapes, sizes, circles, medallions on the ceiling. I myself have a medallion in my guest bedroom where I have a ceiling fan hanging from it. Now, this can also be made out of a plastic type of material. You can find that at Lowe's and various other construction locations, but plaster allows us to create the most intricate, detailed ceilings because of its unlimited ability to be molded and poured into any mold of any shape and size. You can even create domes. Speaking of domes, here's a dome ceiling. Now, this is very tricky because when you have a dome ceiling, you have to really architecturally put it in there, making sure that you have the cut in there, you have the roof space above. This dome ceiling could be made out of fiberglass, plaster, plastic. And so domes obviously have to be molded and to create that shape. They may even have a fresco painting in there or a faux finish plastered inside or stucco. And here we see a dome in this huge area right in the middle where they have treated it with a darker wood, added their ambient lighting, creating an interesting architectural feature over the stairwell. So domes are different, definitely add an architectural feature. It's great when they are, mimicked with these arched windows, really add to the space an architectural vibe. The dome was created by Rome, and we would see this in the Doma. We would see this in the Pantheon. And here we've been able to create it as an interior ceiling finish. Now, next we have, and this is, I want to refer to this as an angled ceiling. When we're dealing with this angled ceiling, we have also things called cathedral ceilings or vaulted ceilings. They're kind of interchangeable. So if I say that I have a vaulted ceiling, what that represents is a diagonal line, a pitch like this, that creates an angled ceiling. And it could have beams on it. It could have planking, it could have trusses, but the idea is that a vaulted or cathedral ceiling is this angled, and you see it on a pitched roof or a pitched ceiling profile. So that is a vaulted ceiling. Very popular to have vaulted ceilings in two-story homes where you walk into the first part and you see those high ceilings. They add grandiose elements of space. People love vaulted ceilings, and they really do widen and make the space look larger. So dome ceilings and vaulted ceilings, you'll find these on a lot of angled ceilings. You need that space above to create a dome. Now, not too much in the ceiling category, but we've got a few ideas between beams, between coffer ceilings, trays, vaulted ceilings, and domes. Now, I do want to go back. When you do have a vaulted ceiling, it's really important that when you purchase your ceiling fan or a lighting fixture, that you have to make sure that it can go on a slanted wall. And that means that the item, the canopy that's holding the top of the fixture, can be tilted. And that's important as well. Now we're going to dive right into windows. Okay, so both residential and commercial spaces offer windows, of course. And what do windows do? Windows offer daylight, right? We love our natural light. They add architectural detail to a space. They provide ventilation, and they give you access to a view. So those are the main components of a window and what they are designed for. There are things to factor in with windows as an interior designer. Factors that impact window choice for the building include the security and the energy efficiency. In some states and in some counties, you have to adhere to certain codes and glazing codes to install new windows that make them more energy efficient, like a double glazed window. Glazing refers to actually glass, the glass that is used in the construction of a window. So it is proper, it's important to make sure that it's properly fitted and that the frames fit into those windows correctly. So that is something that is an important part of windows and the manufacture of windows. When I was working for the Westfield Mall doing a design there, we were designing a restaurant and there was a glazing strike and we had a problem getting our windows installed in the restaurant, and therefore it delayed construction. So this is a huge part of construction and very important. Windows are extremely important in each building. Now, there are many types of basic windows that we want to become familiar with the vocabulary. And some of them are a little bit more old-fashioned that we don't experience here in California. And some will be more standard to you. So a typical awning window is it's kind of like a window that you crank out. So you crank this out and it just tilts out. You might see this in a more of a old 50s style building where the bottom part cranks out and then it just tilts. You also might see it in a bathroom, like on the top of a shower. We may see it in areas where they have limited space and they're more historical buildings. So awning windows aren't that common. You may even see them in hotels and maybe on buses, but they do crank and they tilt out. Now, a double hung window is probably one of the most common windows you'll find in every home, especially here in California. Double hung windows pull up, so there are two windows that therefore the double. They open, you unlatch it here and you pull them up. I have double hung windows. A lot of times I'll put ceiling little fans in here, flat fans, and kind of close the window in the fan. You would need a window like this to house maybe an individual air conditioning unit. So these types of windows are very handy. They allow for good ventilation to come through. But they're a little hard to push up, I'd have to say. So that is a double hung window. Now, a bay window, these were very popular in the 90s and in breakfast nooks or in the entry of a home. You might see it at the front entry. They're very popular. And bay windows are three windows. They're usually just at an angle, and it basically creates a pop out into your space. So it's like a neat little architectural feature. And then we have fixed glazing. So between double hung and fixed glazing, these are probably the more two. And a lot of times they'll even combine them. Fixed glazing is basically just a fixed window. It doesn't open. It's basically just the glass. And sometimes they might be accompanied with two windows that do open for the ventilation, but not always. So that is fixed. So awning cranks out. A double hung has two windows that open and you open it up. A bay window creates a pop out. It's three panels, one larger and the two side at an angle to create a little, almost like a little piece of a hexagon. And then your fixed glazing is fixed glass set there where they do not open. Then we have, which is similar kind of to a bay window, it's called a bow window. And that is a series of the same size window that create a half circle. And that's another architectural feature. You might see this a lot too, back east or in Cape Cod style homes, and it kind of pops out. Maybe you would see it from the second floor. This might serve as a window wall in a bedroom or downstairs in a living room. You might have a little window seat. Now, the horizontal slider is the companion to the double hung. Most homes have both. I have both. The horizontal is just basically a double hung, but just tilted to the side. So you're shifting, you're opening the one pane to the right or left. One part stays fixed while one can slide to the right or the left. In lieu of one part stays fixed, and in the double hung, it slides up or down. So horizontal sliders and double hung and fixed glazed are the three most common windows that we see in, especially in California. Now, casement window reminds me of that awning window, except for it opens up in a parallel instead of out. Okay, this swings out where this swings open and opens up. Once again, it's usually a crank, and you crank and the window will pop open. Now, one of the problems with this type of window is, getting window treatments for this, like putting a blind would be hard. You can't really, a lot of times if it swings in, you can't put a screen. And so they're a little tricky to put window treatments on casement windows. Once again, more of an older fashion on older buildings, you would see casement windows. But we're seeing that a lot more people are putting casement windows, especially in aging in place homes, because casement windows can be easier to open. If it has a slight crank or a push pull, it makes it easier than trying to slide some of these that get kind of stuck. So that is a casement. Now, this particular kind of window, the Palladian, this is something we don't see a lot here, but it has this arch. And so it's three windows, very traditional. And it a lot of times will include details like fluting. It may not always. You also might see this detail in a door, where it'd be a door with 2 skylights. But this Palladian window is also very architectural. Maybe in the Georgian period, you would see that. And it's always accompanied by a larger window in the middle with an arch and 2 side lights. Now, a cathedral window is something that has a pointed arch, and you can imagine just seeing this in a church, can't you? This is reminiscent of the Gothic period. When we study that, you'll see that this little point is very much a signature in cathedrals, and cathedrals really came alive in the Gothic period. So that's why this is named a cathedral window. A lot of times it might have various little panes in it. It may have stained glass. And they add, definitely you'll see it in Tudor style and various style of architecture, and definitely in cathedrals. Now, a side light window is basically these transit windows on the side of a door, allowing these little windowed areas or little pieces of fixed glass. So those are called side lights. And basically they're kind of self-explanatory. They're on the side and allowing natural light to permeate a fixed position. Here they have some clear story windows above. You may see that, the side lights and the clear story. But that's a side light. Now you can also have a door that just has one side light, or you can have one that has both. Now, clear story windows, as I mentioned, are those top little set of windows right here. You can also have that on top of a door, allowing for light to come in. These were first seen back in the Egyptian and pyramids. They weren't able to do large penetrations, but they can have openings on the top, allowing daylighting to come in. So this is a clear story. You may see this in a basement sometimes where they can't, it's subterranean, where it's underground, but it might pop out enough to where they can get these top little windows to allow some light. This also allows the room to be flooded and give general lighting without direct lighting to affect like heating and so forth. Now, back to one of our sources of natural lighting and how we get that in our architecture is skylights. Skylights are punctured windows inside the ceiling, allowing for natural light to penetrate in. Now, we discussed about when we were talking about lighting that this can also cause some issues, very difficult to control. You can't control the heat. And once again, they get pretty dirty, right? So that can be a problem. Now, in your book, and I believe that there's just all different kinds of little cheat sheets. You can also pull these online. It's good to get familiar with all the different types of windows. And a lot of times there'll be parts of windows that may be connected to other parts. Like you may have a top fan sunburst window on top of a fixed window, creating kind of this arch look. So a lot of times they can kind of mix and match and kind of create a new window combination. This projected window is a little bit like a double awning, where it's coming down and it comes out. So it all depends on how the hinge is connected. So here, this is coming in the room, where that one would be pushed out. The vertical pivot, it's just similar, where it can spin all the way around, controlling some of your ventilation. So some of these are a little bit interesting windows. We don't see them a lot. A double hung awning, that might be something that you see. They could even be little slats in a bus, or an interesting type of maybe a basement. So you can see a double hung awning. So those awnings have different styles. So within the typical type of window, you might have variations. Once again, this is a bay window, but what they added is that the fixed windows in the middle and then the double hung on the side. So once again, they're combining windows. That makes it practical. You've got a fixed window to double hung. Now you can get ventilation here. So as you go through this, a single hung awning, you'll see all the different kinds, that awning bow, a casement that just cranks out on both sides, the Palladian window, and a fan. This is called a fan, and that Gothic window. Now, we know all these windows, and what's the challenge when we have windows? Well, the challenge is, what do you do to cover them, right? So window treatments, we're going to talk about them. Window treatments have two functions. One is more decorative, and then one is more functional. And within that, we have different elements that we want to discuss. So in decorative window treatments, what is the purpose? A lot of times they'll soften the window's outline. They could even change the window's proportion. They can also unify a room. So a window and decorative treatments have a lot of function. Now, and they do add aesthetic beauty as well. Now, the functional part about treatments, obviously the number one is to maintain privacy, right? The second is to regulate all of that light. And then thirdly, window treatments actually add a layer of installation. So when you have some blackout curtains that are thick and blinds, you're actually able to either keep the heat in or keep the cool in. And then they also eliminate undesirable views. Okay, so they eliminate undesirable views, which is super helpful. And sometimes you don't want to see something, so you can put a window or a curtain on it, and then it goes away. Now, special consideration when adding treatments is the light, the ventilation, and the view. These are the three areas that we are concerned with when we're putting on and considering the window treatments. So once again, decorative and functional. Decorative, it softens a window, can change its proportion, it unifies the room, adds aesthetic beauty. The functional is it creates privacy, light, regulation, insulation, and can masquerade a view. Function. So window treatments. Function. Now, some of the things that we want to think about. How do they open and they close? Do you want your window treatments to be able to open and close, or do you want them completely stationary where you don't move them? Some people have curtains that are completely stationary and they're to stay just exactly either closed or swagged. So we need to ask that question. I personally like to layer my window treatments so that it gives me more options. Also, we want to look at the line. Do you want it to be straight like curtain panels, or do you want to tie it back, which creates a more swaggy, curved vibe and a little bit more formal? So what's the line in the room? And then good old proportion, right? You want to avoid those square dimensions. Remember, we talked about the golden mean, where one whole is divided in two unequal parts that equal harmony. That's exactly what we want to think about when it comes to this proportion. And let me just make a demonstration. When you have a window, okay, and you have a curtain, and you swag it back, you want to make sure that the swag is, and let me just give it a little, flavor there. I'm not a great artist here using this. But when you see the dimensions, you see that this is larger than this. Okay, that's that. You avoid a square. You don't want a perfect square window and then just put it right in the middle. It chops it in half. So when we do look at that, we want to make sure that we are creating that right golden mean when we're doing the proportion. And we use this, you might use a series of vertical rectangles, because that's mainly what windows are. They're rarely square. Now, the type of treatments that we're going to talk about come in three categories. Kind of reminds me of a little flooring, right? We have soft treatments, top treatments, and hard treatments. Okay, so these are the types of treatments that we deal with. And so here is a great example of soft treatments, these soft shades, these nice curtain panels right here. Now let's go right into soft window treatments. Now, soft treatments are the following: curtains, drapery, shades, and stationary panels. Now, Curtains and draperies. A lot of people get them confused, and we're going to talk about this. Here we have a series of draperies, and how do you tell the difference? And you know what? Many designers interchange the two. So it is important that you understand the difference. And draperies usually have more hardware on them, as you can see here. They're very structured, and they have a lot more hardware behind it. Okay, so they're more structured, they're more constructed, and they have a more of a mechanical hardware. Okay, so this is where we get draperies. So common type of draperies and curtains. These are some of the top treatments here. You might, be familiar with this. Ripple fold is basically, it comes in a little ripple. A tailored pleat. So it hooks here, and then it has this little tailored pleat. Then you have a pinch pleat. This is very popular, where it's kind of like you take the pleat, it pinches here, and then the hardware is at the top. Now, an inverted pleat is a little bit more contemporary and clean, and it's basically just a very clean without the pleats. Here we have grommets, which are the most popular right now in regular curtains. I have them all through my house. It's super simple. Now the goblet, it almost looks like a little cup here. This cubicle right here is a different type where it's kind of more of a wave. And then you have just a rod pocket where it's just shredded. Now out of all of these, this is considered more of a curtain, and this is considered more of a curtain. And these are a little bit more tailored, that have hardware in them to create more of structure. So drapery fabrics. So draperies, draperies are more heavy and structured, like I said. They have a tighter weave, and they're very durable and stable. And the best fibers for the drapery are synthetic fibers, cotton, and linen. Now we want to avoid silk and acetate because they tend to fade in the sunlight. So drapery lining, that is something that you add behind the drapes to give it more structure. And this is where drapes are different than curtains, because curtains usually aren't as structured as draperies, and draperies are far more expensive. But when you add your drapery lining, a backing to this, it really makes them reduce fading from the sun. It also adds stability and durability, and it adds fullness and uniformity to the whole appearance. Also, drapery hardware is something that is different. There's both functional, which is very mechanical, and then there's the decorative. And with drapery, they tend to need these very inconspicuous stationary rods and traverse rods. So when you see this very structured top right here, a lot of times you'll see it here, right here, it's hidden. All of that traverse rod is hidden. See, and it's housed. You see this in hotels and stuff. So these, you put the little hooks on here, and then you pull that little cord, and it traverses to the left and the right, but you don't see all of this hardware. And sometimes you'll have double ones where there's a sheer drapery in the back and then the blackout drapery in the front, especially in formal settings or hotels. You could have a simple cocktail rod, or a cafe rod that would be more for curtains, or a simple rod that you could put a sheer or grommets on. So these are just a little more functional. But when you get to decorative, these can be stationary, or you can move, the curtains back and forth. They usually have these very decorative finials, and they have a ton of different kinds. So whatever the vibe you're going for, make sure that you pick the right finial and the right finish. Now, a lot of times these decorative rods can be installed right in front of this more functional rod to hide it. So here are some very structured, very expensive decorative drapery treatments. So here we're having these swags. There's this top treatment that's very structured. As you see this piece of molding, all of the hardware is tucked behind there. You have these swags. And as I talk about the swag, see how that top part is a little longer than the bottom. And that is giving you a very formal, graceful curve, along with these beautiful puddles and all of this detail. So you can see that draperies are very structured and a little bit more formal and in a more traditional type setting. Here they have a sheer, which is lighter fabric, and then this little swag back. So they chose to do the opposite, make this shorter and then this longer. This little element is called a puddle or a bishop sleeve, where it puddles on the ground. This used to be very popular in the 90s, 80s, but then, you know, they easily get caught in the vacuum cleaner. Now, curtains are less structured. So this is something that I have in my home, just some teal curtains on a grommet and a simple rod. Behind it is a sheer where you can just add yourself layers, which is lovely. It allows for that kind of a glowy effect. And then when you want the blackout, you can pull the more structured blackout curtains on the front. Here they just have them sheared on a cafe rod or in that that wavy structural pleated. So these are more curtains are less structural and require less functional hardware. Now, when we get into our next type of soft window treatment, we're going to investigate shades. So the first is curtains and drapery. Then we have shades. That's the next part of our soft draperies. So shades are soft and they are usually pulled down. So they come from the top to the bottom, and there's many different styles, as you can see. So a roller shade might be just those cheap little vinyl ones, or they might be made out of various materials or prints, but basically you just pull them down. They also have electrical roller shades, which we have in the classroom at OCC. You might see that in a lot of commercial where they have remote control and they rolled up and down. That's very conducive for commercial large projects and large windows. So roller shades, they do the trick and they have a lot of blackout. Australian shades have many, many little gathers here. And so when you pull them, they kind of pucker up, creating this very gathered type of situation. And they definitely are more formal and a lot more, something you'd see in the South a little bit more. Now, the Roman shades are similar to this, but more simple. They have just simple, graceful folds. So here you have more of the, you see more of the fabric, and it will just kind of gracefully pucker up into a folded area. This has several little scallops where that's just may have one or two. That's a Roman shade. Here is a more popular Roman shade too, where this is kind of pleats and it just comes up a little bit more structurally. Now, pleated shades, these are fabulous, kind of come in different types of materials, and they're pleats, and they easily come up and down. You will see these also like this. They're structural right here. The thing about this is they don't allow any light in them. So they're either up or down. Now, there's some interesting pleated shades that you can actually click on, and they can drop from below, from up, or down. So you can see light on the top or light on the bottom. And let me tell you something, I have those window treatments, and it's so great because if I just want like a foot of light to come from the top, that is really beneficial because maybe I don't want to see into my neighbor's yard. So that's the best part to me about those particular pleats, is that I can kind of pull the little cord and just drop it to allow this beauty. I could see the mountains. I don't have to see inside my neighbor's yard. So pleated shades have come very, very far. And then you can get them double pleated like a honeycomb, and inside it is a filament, so you can have them blackouts. So that makes it so that it's a lot more functional. So pleated shades have come very far. Now we have balloons, and this is a great little kind of more of an exaggerated Australian, where it's a little bit more fluffy. You might see this in a very feminine environment or traditional, and it usually, adds a lot more decorative element. Here is a more practical other types of shades. You see they come a long way. So this is just your pole shade, but made in grass cloth. It's fabulous, adding some great light to come in and wonderful texture. You could see that you can have pull down shades with a little scallop, with a little fringe maybe. Something that is more, that has some of this acts as that, a shade that has that a Roman shade vibe. When you pull this up, it kind of folds into little folds. Here, similar to, it has a print. So sometimes you can have those pull down shades with a print. Here's that little white screens. Here's more of the pleated, like I said, those blackout cellular shades where they're double. And they actually have blackout material in there. And then here's a nice Roman shade, that's just that gentle fold, and then more of a roller shade. Here's what I was talking about. So I have these in my room, and see how you can open up the top so you can see the top, maybe do a little at the bottom or not have the bottom at all, or vice versa. Super, super functional. Now we're going to talk about top window treatments. So we have talked about, so these are our horizontal treatments. So we just talked about our vertical treatments, our windows and curtains and our shades. Those come down. Now we're going to talk about what's on top. So top treatments are called horizontal treatments, and they're very decorative, but they also have a functional use. They also create a finished look, and they have a functional use because they hide the hardware. They can also improve the window's proportions. So we have two different kinds of top treatments. One is soft and one is hard. A cornice treatment is very structured and hard, and a valance is a soft treatment. Now, not advisable to put a lot of these on very low ceilings because they would only make the ceilings look lower, okay? And casement windows that swing in that we were talking about, those casement windows that you crank into the house, that would not work well if you had window curtains, or you had, even a top treatment. You could not be able to crank that window into the space. So it add a problem, right? So we want to make sure that we use the right window treatment for the right window. So making sure you have the right window. So here they have a pleated shade in here, but we have this beautiful, this is called a valance. It's a soft treatment, very structured. It has some beautiful cascades, some nice curves to it. And it's also hiding whatever's going on underneath. So here's a combination. We have our little drapery panels. We have pleated shades behind, and then we have a top valance that's very structured. This is giving a formal look. It's creating a lot of interest. And also it could, if the window maybe stopped here, the fact that they mounted it at the ceiling is giving the space more height and making the room look taller. So we can change the proportion of the window by the way we frame it out. Here you'll see tons of different valance styles, and they just like draperies and so forth. You can have the cascades on the side, the little scalloped right here, little scallops, bells. I mean, there's a million different styles. We have various, soft drips. We have inverted pleats. I mean, it's numerous. And you can kind of investigate this in your book, but each one, it's good to do some investigation. If you're doing the Louis XV, this was very reminiscent of that. That would be Louis XV. Can you see that? If you want something cleaner, a little bit more contemporary, an inverted box pleat would be the way to go. But there really is copious amounts of styles. Here you go. So soft treatments or valances, they're made out of fabric usually. And the rule of thumb is at least 12 to 24 inches. So they're not really too short, and they have to have a little bit of length to them. And as you can see, there's just so many different styles. Here's a little pleated. It reminds me of the curtain, right? And so here you see a little pleated valance. Reminds me of those draperies we were talking about. And see how this valance is hiding the curtains or draperies behind? So that little decorative rod is hiding those. And it gives it a nice finished cohesive look. Here's that sheared, where they just did the sheared top. They put it on a cafe rod, right? They just ran that decorative rod there and just sheared it across. And once again, it could hide a curtain behind there. And you can just create a scallop edge. You could create a jagged edge. I mean, you could do whatever you want. You could add little trim. Here, that ballooned style reminds me a little bit of the some of the shades that we saw, but the ballooned, it's just stationary and just kind of sits there. It doesn't go up and down like we saw with those Australian shades. If this were, if this could go up and down, that would be like an Australian shade. But it's just stationary, just to give it a very, volume and some curves and some femininity to space. Now, swags and cascades, these are very more formal, and they give a nice, interesting kind of graceful topper to a window. So you see the cascades kind of drip to the side. You can swag, you can have several swags, depends how long the window is. Here's a fabric valance that just has that little box pleat on the top, which is this very tailored little pleat here, and it kind of wraps around the space. And it's very simple, but really kind of tops off that window nicely. You can also do so many different ideas. I've made little valances where I've just taken a piece of fabric like this, ran it across and put, you know, a couple of handkerchiefs and tied them up, creating kind of like a little Roman shade look. Really cute top treatment. Actually, that's in my, something like that is in my bathroom that I created. Here they have a little inverted box pleat in between the scallop. Here, this is cute, this little tie back. Here I have this actually exact window treatment. Basically, it's just a piece of fabric, and I took 2 pieces of ribbon. I kind of tied them up to create this kind of graceful vibe. And then this is kind of another version of swags and cascades, but not so structural. So instead of having a sheared straight across, they looped them. And then here's another form of a little box pleat, but having it with a scallop. You could do a top treatment with just about anything. Look at that. They did it with jewelry across. Here they have like a double treatments, so giving that little peekaboo and some scallops. So as you can see, it just really is unlimited. I've used handkerchiefs or you know, and bandanas. I was doing a country type of a window treatment, and I literally took the triangles, and so I had a piece of square denim. And then on top, we put the bandanas and then some cool little big buttons and some buckly things. And it created this kind of Western cowboy vibe. So you can imagine that on a top treatment, you can just do anything. I've just seen just scarves just draped over there, kind of Romanesque vibe. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do, and even unconventional materials that you can use in order to create a cool look. Now, we're going to skip from the soft top treatment, which is valances, to a hard top treatment, which is called cornices. Now, cornices are very rigid. A lot of times they're made out of basically a wood base. And you can stain them, you can paint them, you can put padding on them and upholster them like a cornice box. They're usually not as large. You wouldn't see a big 24-inch or 12. Usually they're kind of 4 to 8 inches, something a little bit less. Because they're so structural, you don't want to cut a lot of the light. Cornices really do house a lot of hardware, and you see them a lot in hotels. Here, a cornice, I mean, they just used a little different detail, but it's basically that's this little top treatment. It could have any type of profile on the top. Lambquin, they're just basically a version where it drapes 3/4 of the window. So it almost creates an entire frame. This is very historical. See this here, right here? And then the Cantonese is actually in an entire piece that kind of boxes out the window or could be recessed. So that's something you would see, something very historical. So these 2 are not as popular, but cornices all day long right here. Here is a simple cornice box, just has a fabric on it with little detailed rivets. Here, it's just a molding made out of wood molding that was built out in a box, creating a nice architectural detail. You can upholster them, adding little tufting and adding little welts on it, creating a very tailored look. This kind of reminds me of a headboard, but it is on rigid material. Here, they actually just used a thin plywood and created a little kind of like a roof detail with little scallops. Here, they have 2 different kinds of fabric on a piece of board and some trimming. So they could be very tailored. They could be cut out, laser cut and like a lacy wood for a Victorian vibe, or molded even into like a fiberglass and stenciled. Here's that lambquin that we talked about, where it kind of drapes to the side, kind of keeping that hard vibe. Oops. And here are some different types of shapes. You've got a straight shape, a scallop, a 2-step, 1-step, kind of soft curves. You can do a wide scallop. I mean, it's just really unlimited. I've seen, even squared triangles, zigzags. I mean, you name it, whatever you can cut. Here's just a symbol. This is very 1990s, where you just took an upholstery. This upholstery is something I saw in the 90s and the 2000s, little welt, and there you go. There's your kitchen. Now we have gone from soft treatments, which is our draperies, our curtains, and our shades, and top treatments, which is our valances, and our cornices, which are both soft and hard. And now we're going to go to hard window treatments. So here we are going to talk about blinds, shutters, some specialty glass, and sliding doors. Now, hard window treatments, such as blinds, these are one of the most popular treatments today that we see in windows. I would say the most popular. They're less expensive than full-on shutters, very functional. They allow for light to come in and out. You can open them up or down for full sun. And they're not that expensive. They've come very far too. They're making like this faux type of plastic slats to make it look like wood, so they don't chip or flake as easy. So they've come a long way. I have wood shutters, wood blinds throughout my house. Now, of course, the step back is they do gather a lot of dust, but especially these little aluminum ones. Now, these aluminum ones, these are so 80s, but they bend easy. So we don't see a lot of the metal shades, but they're very inexpensive, come in every color in the world. But they do collect dust. Now, these mechanisms, one of the sides opens and closes the slats. And so they make the slat open and close. So the louver, okay, that's one side. So that helps manipulate that. Sometimes you twist it, the traverse rod, and that will make the louver open or close. Sometimes you pull those little pulleys. The other pulley will actually open up the entire and stack the entire blinds, which you've probably done a million times. So I'm sure that's no stranger to you, but those are what those are. But as to the reason why I point them out, see, here's just a little rod, and one might just have the cord. So sometimes they have two cords, sometimes a rod and a cord, but we as designers have to specify what is the opening on the left and what is the slat opening, and you actually have to specify it. And if you're, let's say you have a big window and there is space on this side, you want to make sure that that pulley is on this side. Let's say the client can't get to this side of the window. So it's really important specifying where you want your traverse rod to go. See here, if I twist this little guy, it will open up these louvers. Okay, but on the other side will be like a cord, and that will just lift the whole thing up. Then we have our lovely vertical blinds, right? And we all love our blinds. And if we were live in class, we'd all talk about the nightmare about how they fall off, right? The number one problem with vertical blinds, besides their looks, is that they chip here. And a lot of times the slats fall off. So those are no fun. However, they're very functional. They do lend itself to a strong vertical line, and this is a strong horizontal line, right? And but there is ways to cover them up. See, they even have a top little harder treatment, a little cornice here. It's like a little plastic that they have a little piece of the vinyl on there to cover up the ugly hardware that's right there, right, that you see. So you could cover this up with a valance. You could add draperies on the side or little curtains. And so when you stack this back, you can create and hide that vertical blind. So that is a way to kind of cheat. Okay, so we're going from blinds to shutters. Shutters are far more architectural. They don't have as much mobility because you cannot lift them up to get clear the whole window. You actually have to open them. The problem with these shutters sometimes is the fact that when you open them up, you need stacking space on the side, right? So you really need, nothing can be in the way. You can't have any furniture in the way. If you're going to swing this open, right, you've got to have a big part of the window or wall available to you. Also, this little louver here makes it go up and down. But right here is a very fragile part of a shutter. It's just a little teeny nail and it just barely holds it on. So if something is leaning against a shutter and you open this, you could pull that nail out and pretty soon you got a little flappy one of these panels. Another thing that's tricky about shutters is these little starburst tops. Remember, we talked about the window that have these starburst. The problem with these windows, very popular in the 80s, it's hard to put the treatment on. These are very expensive and control the sun. Here they created an arch custom one. So you can make shutters very custom. Here you see how this has to fold against the wall, right? They also, they're kind of limiting, and just the fact that you can't put any furniture, next to them, else it's going to affect the space. So they kind of block a lot of the sun. And that's one of the things that I do see that could be, problematic. And they're very, very, very expensive. So, but they do look very architectural. They do give a very finished look when you are for like the front of the house. So if you're going to invest in shutters, I'd probably put them where they're going to be seen and not need to be opened a lot. And that might be in the front of your house. Now, the next we're going to talk about, kind of new, is the sliders. And, we call these like the barn doors. And they actually come in different ways, where this looks like a shutter, right? It is kind of a shutter. It's like a combination shutter because you use the louvers to go up and down, but they slide on tracks, both sides. And so that, kind of gives it this architectural feature, but some function to open up the window or the door. This is a huge door. You guys see this? And so you could slide this. Now you can get privacy. You could slide it back and forth to open up to get through. Here, this is cute. It's like a little faux shutter, and then you can slide that to create the privacy or open it. Now, some people just use these as just architectural features and never slide them. They maybe put curtains in the middle. They're just like for side panels, just to give interest. Here, this is cute. This little kind of farmhouse, white, where you can slide them or keep them open. And here they used them as decorativeness because they have the blinds in the middle. Here they have just, it's open. So there's a lot of options. They kind of give some character, some interesting elements. So this is something you might want to consider. But remember, it's kind of all or nothing, man. Once you shut that, it's just completely blocking out the light. And another kind of hard window treatment is a glass. You may not think of that. You can actually put in panes of different types of decorative glass, glass windows, glass blocks, and this is a way to add a window treatment. Here they have little glass panes with all the different leaded glass elements. It gives it some privacy while allowing light and giving decorative element and beauty. Here, this is actually a textured decorative glass that actually has a relief of bamboo. You can do frosted glass, and in some cases you can actually take film that go right on the glass. So you can treat glass that way, and it creates kind of a window treatment. You're treating the window, and a lot of it is nice because you may want some privacy, but allow for natural light and beauty to come in. The ultimate window treatment guide. This is a very fun video. We should listen to right now. Okay, guys, let's do that.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Julie, and today we will be discussing the great wide world of window treatments. With such a variety of materials and styles out there, window treatments are an ideal way to bring color, pattern, texture, and style to elevate the vibe of your space. They're also super practical, providing various degrees of privacy, insulation, and sunlight. This video will be a comprehensive beginner's guide to all things window treatments. I'll be breaking down and explaining all the various types of window treatments so that you can choose the correct one for your ideal space. This is really going to be a lengthy, in-depth look at window treatments, so grab your cup of coffee, your tea, your green juice, your wine, whatever your poison, and let's dive right in. Let's talk about style. First, you want to consider the type of ambiance that you want to create in your room. There are so many different styles ranging from classic to traditional to contemporary and modern, and there's window treatments to fit every style and budget. The way your windows are covered or not will help set the design tone for the room. First, let's talk about the difference between drapery panels and curtains. I'm pretty sure you've heard of the term drapes. You see them all online and all over catalogs, but let me tell you, when I first started in design school, I learned that drapes are a verb. So clearly that's not the correct terminology. If you want to get like all designer lingo fancy, call them drapery panels. So what is the difference between drapery panels and curtains? The simple difference is that curtains are usually lighter in material and they're unlined, allowing some sunlight to filter through. Drapery panels are a little bit heavier, they're thicker, they're typically lined and a little bit more formal. But if you've heard drapery panels and curtains used interchangeably, that's totally okay. I mean, it's very common and people confuse them all the time. If you're specifying drapery panels and you want optimal fullness, the width of the panels should double the width of the windows. But if you're trying to save a little bit of money, have your fabricator make them 1.5 times the width of the windows instead. There's a variety of different drapery top details out there. Drapery panels with little pleats visibly sewn at the top of the panel is a little bit more formal and very sophisticated. This type of design works with rings and you place them right on rods in a corded pulley system. My favorites are French pleats, whether or not single, double, or triple pleated for pure luxury. This type of pleating looks really amazing with silk or like a silk poly blend or even velvet, just because the fabric is so lush and rich and it has a lot of depth and texture. Lately, I've been specifying inverted pleats in a really modern setting. I love the way they still add dimension to the drapery panel, but it's a little bit more tailored and streamlined. When selecting curtains, you have a choice of a variety of different hanging styles. Rod pockets hang from a rod that's inserted in a channel on the top of the curtain. The combination of lush fabric with a substantial rod looks really elegant in a formal room, while the lightweight fabric softens the space thin. Rod pockets are a little bit harder to slide on the rod, so if you know that you'll be using the curtains a lot, this might not be the right choice for you. Tap top curtains have little fabric tabs that accommodate the rod. This keeps the rod visible and works well in informal rooms. Grommet curtains have holes rimmed with metal rings that your curtain will go through. If you suspect that you'll be opening and closing your curtains frequently, grommet curtains will be the right choice for you as they slide easily along the rod. A designer's tip for specifying grommet curtains: make sure the color of the grommet rings match the color of the pole finish. Grommet and tap top curtains typically look more informal and casual than the rod pocket type. Moving on to sheers. You guys know how I love sheer panels. I mean, behind me, I've lined like a bunch of sheer panels on my windows. The reason I love it is because it lets so much sunlight through. You still have semi-privacy and is really great for giving your windows that ambient glow. Since you can still see through sheers, if you want a little bit more privacy, I would pair them with blackout drapery panels or curtains. If your home doesn't get a lot of natural daylight or if there are dark corners in your space, that's when you should use sheers. Moving on to valances and cornices. What is a valance? A valance is a sheet of fabric that's usually stretched along a rod that's hung directly above a window frame. Simple valances can be made from any type of lightweight fabric, and they're typically hung right on a rod. They can bring a burst of color or pattern or texture to a very casual room. On the flip side, a pleated valance will add a little bit more of a tailored look and sophistication. Cornices are valances made from wood, and they're typically painted or covered with fabric or wall covering. They're mounted to the wall above a window, and they look really great in rooms with architectural detailing like crown molding. Both valances and cornices pair really well with shades or sheers or additional curtains. The key here is to go for really modern lines, clean lines, right angles, versus something with like really frilly swags or ruffles. Stay away from ruffles and swags, guys. It's just like bed skirts. You want to keep the look very tailored and minimal. Moving on to shades and blinds. A shade is typically a long piece of fabric that rolls up the top. Shades cover your windows from top to bottom, and when completely closed, they allow the maximum amount of privacy. When paired along with a valance or drapery panel or curtains, they give you the best of both worlds in terms of form and function. They're simple, they're elegant, and they can be mixed and matched in any type of casual setting or formal room. Because they fit snugly inside of a window frame, they offer a very streamlined and tailored look. Shades are really ideal for bathrooms and kitchens, any space where flowing window treatments just aren't practical. Roman shades bring a tailored look into the room, and they provide excellent color and texture in any traditional or informal setting. When closed, a Roman shade lies flat against the window, and it can show off a pop of color, a really beautiful pattern, or really cool texture on your window. When it's open, the shade fabric stacks evenly along the top side of your window and creates these really beautiful folds. Billowy balloon shades fold along the bases when they're fully open. It frames a window with a really soft, romantic, and gauzy look. I've installed this type of billowy shade in my client's dressing room before, and I just really love the look. It's chic, it's modern, it's sophisticated, and it's really the only time I'll allow a little bit of ruffles to sneak in. Bamboo shades are inexpensive and expressive. I love the look of bamboo for the texture and dimension alone. There are so many different varieties of colors of bamboo shades that you really can pair them with any type of drapery look and be able to custom design your space in an instant. Roller shades roll up at the top with a pool of accord. This look gives the window a really clean and modern appearance and works really beautifully with drapery and curtains as well. In contemporary settings, you'll see a lot of different examples of mixed-use window treatments. You'll often see simple roller shades paired with heavier drapery panels, or bamboo blinds paired with unlined curtains. Using this paired method will give you the maximum amount of control over the light and privacy peeking through. If you want further control over the amount of light coming through, I would specify blackout panels or at least blackout liners behind the shades or the curtains. Moving on to blinds. Blinds have slats made out of metal, wood, plastic. I've seen these window treatments made out of fabric slats of blinds before. Blinds give you the greatest flexibility in terms of privacy and light control. Wood, bamboo, and fabric-colored blinds give a very soft and organic feel to the room, whereas aluminum, metal, or plastic gives more of an industrial vibe. My personal opinion, I hate blinds. I think they look cheap. I think they look tacky. And not only that, I think they are such a nuisance to clean. I mean, you literally have to dust every single slat. If you've ever tried daunting task of cleaning blinds, I mean, it takes all dang day. But the thing I hate more than blinds is plantation shutters. I mean, I just shudder at the thought of plantation shutters, and I'll tell you why. Number one, they're not cost effective. I mean, they're really expensive. Usually window fabricators will push installing plantation shutters in your home because they make the most profit for the least amount of work involved. All they have to do is come into your house, measure, every single window, send the measurements off to their fabricator, and then a few weeks later, you have these custom shutters that to me looks almost like a prison cell when you're outside on the street. I feel like they block out so much natural light, and at the same time, they don't allow you to push furniture up against the windows, or else you wouldn't be able to open the shutters. I understand the practical aspect of it, especially if you're living on a first level home where you have, neighbors peeking in at you all the time. But I think there are so many options that are better out there in terms of window treatments that will fit your style and personality. I mean, if you have plantation shutters in your home, what do you think that says about your style? When I walk into a client's home and they already have plantation shutters, I always ask them why. Why did you install these plantation shutters? And 9 out of 10 times they say, because I didn't know what else to do. I don't know if that's a good enough reason for you, but for me as a designer, you could do better. I'm not going to dive too much into materials because like color, to me, it's just a personal preference. However, choosing the right material and texture for your space is very important. The weight and texture of the fabric will control the amount of light filtering through. And at the same time, you need to pay attention to how well it holds up to sun exposure. If there's too much light coming through the windows and they're not covered by a heavy drapery panel or some form of curtains, sometimes it has a capacity to fade the furniture that you put inside the room. So just be careful. Linen and canvas are typically very durable materials that drape very beautifully. Silk and velvet fit in formal spaces. There are just so many different varieties of fabric options out there, so make sure you choose one that fits your personality, your style, and the space. Moving on to functionality. If you're torn between the different looks of window treatment types, maybe you love the look of linen curtains, but you want the privacy of shades, you don't have to choose. You really can layer the look on any type of window treatments to make it work for you. This method is also especially effective if you have radiators or heaters at your window. Even when you're keeping the curtains open so as not to block the airflow, the inner window treatment can still provide the privacy that you need. Blackout light in the back of the panel helps block light and adds additional privacy. This is perfect for bedrooms or even media rooms when you want it completely pitch dark. Liner fabric helps protect the fabric from harmful UVA and UVB sunlight that can also fade the fabric. So depending on the function that you're after, it's a good idea to look for fabric that's backed with a liner or blackout. So to sum it up, for a formal look, consider drapery panels. For a tailored effect, consider shades. For the utmost flexibility, consider layering drapery panels or curtains over your sheers, shades, or blinds. Let's move on to everyone's design dilemma, measurements and size considerations. Any of these type of window treatments can be mounted on the inside of your window frame or on the outside of your window frame. If you've watched a few of my videos, you'll know that the key way to make a small room look larger is by mounting your hardware on the outside of your window frames. But before we get to that, let's talk about when inside mounting would be the best fit for you. Positioning shades and blinds on the inside of your window creates a very uniform look that's very tailored and works well if you pair it with curtains or drapery on the outside. That's more for a custom look, but if you can't afford that custom price tag, there's no reason that you can't specify a shade or a blind that's just a little bit larger than the size of your window. Valances and cornices are most often mounted on the outside of your window because they almost frame the look of that window. Typically, you'll want to measure at least 1 to 3 inches on both sides of the window to install a valance or a cornice. To size an inside mounted treatment, just measure the distance between the casing from inside left to inside right. Knowing the vertical distance of the casing also helps for you to specify the length of the panel. For outside mounted window treatments, notice the length and the width of the window frame. This is where it could get very tricky and where your designer hat is going to come into play. You've seen from my previous videos on common mistakes where to mount that drapery rod. A typical distance that I love to use is about 3 to 4 inches underneath the ceiling or underneath the crown molding. This method will visually extend the vertical height of the room, making those low ceilings look taller than they really are. Now that you know where to hang your rod, let's talk about the length of the panel. To specify the length of that panel, you'll then want to measure the height of the rod to the floor. If your room has multiple windows in a row, you'll also want to measure the distance between the windows to get the full width of every panel you should purchase. These measurements are super important when choosing the width and length of the window treatment and the hardware placement. Moving on to window hardware. Window hardware from curtain rods to clips to finials put the finishing touch in every single room. When it comes to materials and colors, bright brass adds a touch of elegance to a traditional room, while brushed aluminum, nickel, or even stainless steel looks sleek and modern. I've been loving matte black for its transitional look, and wood tone just adds warmth. Used with curtains and drapery panels, curtain rods suspend the fabric on top of your window. Substantial rods in really wide diameters are a little bit more formal and create a dramatic focal point for any room. Narrow cafe rods are best suited for kitchens and bathrooms using lightweight curtains and materials. Tension rods are mounted on the inside of your window frames, and they're perfect for renters or any type of space where you don't want to drill any holes. When choosing an adjustable rod, make sure you pick a rod side that doesn't fully extend the entire width of your window. What you don't want is a little sag in the middle. This will provide the extra support that you need for the rods and the drapery. Double curtain rods use 2 sets of rods to frame the window. The inner rod is designed to hold the sheer fabric in place, and it's usually on a thinner rod. And the outer rod is where you'll put the heavier drapery panel or the curtains. To let some light in but maintain privacy, you'll open the outer curtains and leave the shears in place. Moving on to finials. Finials are those ornamental pieces that you add to the end of curtain rods. They're most commonly made from wood, metal, glass, or even acrylic, and they add a decorative touch to the window treatment. Choose your finial shape based on your style. Round ones are usually more traditional, cylindrical ones more modern. There's also pyramid, square, block, fleur-de-lis. They come in all shapes and sizes. If you can't decide on a particular shape for a finial, I would choose one with a profile that closely matches your rod so it almost disappears. Clip rings attach to the top of your curtain using little hooks or clips that you slide directly over a rod. These work well in both formal and casual rooms. The rings slide across your rod, and it makes it so easy to open and close your windows. Look for ornate rings in bright, bold colors and metallic hues to create a dramatic effect, or you can opt for sleek and shiny metals for a contemporary, understated feel. The right window treatments and hardware can soften a room, create a dramatic focal point, and add personality to your space. To create your desired look, it really helps to know all the different styles and the functions that are out there. As illustrated in this video, you'll know that every single type of window treatment has a different effect on your space. Blending all the different window treatments with a variety of hardware out there gives you countless combinations for any type of window treatment that you desire. I mean, really, the options are absolutely endless. So I know that there's something out there that is going to express your personality and your vibe. We did it, guys. I know that this is a lot of information to digest, and I know that when you need it, I will be here for you. Just consider this video your #1 resource as the ultimate guide to window treatments.
Okay, so that was a
If you
lot.
like this type of content,
Okay,
please
oops.
give this video a thumbs up.
I guess I have to
And
get rid of
let's
it.
start chatting in the comments. I love the comment section, and I'm especially loving that you guys.
Can I get to the next phrase? Oh, there it is. Okay. So
Hello.
so we're done with that. So that was a lot to digest, but there's so much about window treatments. It's such a huge, huge, huge thing, a part of interior design, thinking about that. So remember, as we're thinking about all the different kinds of windows, we use mainly double hung or a slider and fixed glazing. So those are mainly the windows you have to treat. As a recap, we have our various types of window treatments. We have soft ones, top ones, and hard ones, kind of like flooring. Remember, flooring was soft, resilient, and hard. So those soft window treatments are curtains and draperies. Top treatments, valances, and cornices, and then hard is our blinds, our shutters, our glass treatment, and the sliders. So that is a great thing. Now, this is quite the video, but we have to continue. This is a long class. So now we're going to kind of dive in a little bit about like what fabrics you would actually put on those treatments, just a short one, and talk a little bit about printing and how to mix different fabrics and different for different applications. So, here was the reflection question, what type of window treatments do you see in commercial interiors? And like I had discussed, a lot of times in commercial, we use a lot of roller shades that are electrical. If it's a more formal space, you might see something like of this nature, but something usually more a little bit clean cut. And then homes, there's so many different styles she just went through, but really layering them just like light always gives a more finished, polished look. Now, when we get into textiles really quick, I'm not going to tarry too much. This is the quicker part because we have a whole course on textiles, but just want to talk about the overall, just a quick summary. Designers, when we talk about textiles, it's really important that we understand the color trends and patterns and schemes. And what we do is we put together what's called maybe a color story. We study color. Some of those successful color stories here might be an analogous color scheme with your green, yellow, and yellow, your warm tones. You might find complementary color schemes, but we put together all the materials that we just talked about, all your wall treatments, all your flooring, all your paint, all of the fabrics, what's going on where. We just went through all of the various types of finishes. And as we collect them together, we're creating a story for the client. So these are called material boards. And they basically are all the interior finishes and samples on the board. So it communicates to the client, and it also identifies what it looks like. And designers have to follow those health and safety codes that we talked about. And, those kind of things. And I want to show you, grab a color board just to show you what I mean as I get my board. And this is one of mine. Let me just, okay, so here I have a material board. And we talked about so many of these finishes recently. I have a wood paneling. We talked about different woods and different ways to meet the wall treatments. I also have 3 kinds of vinyl wall covering, very solid, a great texture, almost has like a sheen to it. I'm using vinyl wall flooring. This is that rolled wood, resilient wood flooring. We have 2 different colors in it. I'm using a nice engineered like a terrazzo glass quartz for the tops. We're using glass tiles for this reception area, bringing in some of my task lighting into over the top of this reception counter. You'll see this gorgeous glass tile that we're using as an accent in the restroom. with a field tile that goes in between. Here is my waiting area. I'm identifying the different paint colors, the type of furniture, and the type of laminate and treatments for the furniture and the reception area. So on this board, I have represented lighting. Here's little sconces that are evident here. I'm representing the fabric. I'm representing the flooring, the wall treatments, the different types of tiles and accent tiles. So you can see a lot goes into these material boards. This shares and tells the design and the story of the space. And so we've gone over all of those materials. That's what we did. And this is why it's so important for interior designers to be aware of all their options and are they meeting the codes. So how do we kind of put those together? You have to have that knowledge. Let me continue and kind of share that in these, you know, different kinds of boards. They communicate to the client, just like you saw, what the design is going to be. But in that, I made sure that each one of those materials met the health and safety codes and all of the prerequisites that we need for a healthcare facility. Now, designers weigh many considerations about textiles. So when I'm pulling those fabrics and stuff, I have to make sure, are they durable? How do they feel? Is the performance correct? Do they have the safety factors? Like, they have the flammability rating that I need, the quality, the cost, and the budget and the availability even. So even in that, when you saw my board, I had textiles in there that were on the chairs. Now, in the fibers that we use, textile fibers, very basic building blocks, we are looking for strength, abrasion resistance, flexibility, and moisture absorption. And these are very important when you're making, especially creating drapes and window treatments. You want to really take a look at your textile. Also, too, even their resistance to sunlight. So natural fibers, they come from plants, animal sources. And manufactured fibers are made from wood, cellulose, coal, gasoline, oil, and chemicals, believe it or not. So we use actually a lot of petroleum products in our vinyl fabrics and so forth. So the two types of textiles that we deal with when making especially window treatments or putting on our furniture are natural and manufactured. Kind of reminds me of carpet, right? So those natural cellulose fibers, those are things like cotton, flax, hemp seed, jute, and bamboo. Those are all fibers that we use. You might see a bamboo grass cloth, bamboo wall covering, jute backing we use for carpets. Hemp, very green, that's used for window treatments, floors, and walls. We can use them as roller shades. Flax, that's what we use to make linen out of. Very luxurious, very expensive. It's great for draperies and wall covering. Now, cotton is one of the most important natural fibers, and that's used for curtain and draperies, also in upholstery fabric, and especially in residential. So here's some of our natural options, especially for the treatments that we have just talked about between walls and between the window treatments. These are some of the fibers you'd use. Now, when we get into some of these natural protein fibers, that's going to be from animals. So we have wool, and we discussed about wool in carpet, how it's naturally flame resistant. You could have wool draperies. That might be in a space where you need to worry about keeping in heat. So wool's an option. It's very expensive. Now, cashmere is even more expensive. That comes from goats, cashmere goats. Very expensive, very soft. I don't have the budget for cashmere, but maybe a throw pillow or a little blanket, a throw blanket. Now, Angora also comes from Angora goats, and that is extremely soft. I thought cashmere is soft, but this is a little bit of longer hair in Angora. Then you have silk. That comes from the cocoon of a silkworm. It's one of the strongest all-natural fibers. And it can be done in treatments, upholstery, wall covering. However, silk, you have to be careful. It's hard to clean, and it could be fade resistant with the sun. And then you have natural skin like leather. We use leather furniture all the time, and furs for rugs and so forth. So when you're thinking of the natural fibers, we have fibers such as cotton and linen, and then you have your protein fibers. So those are all the natural realm, derived from nature. When we get into the manufactured fibers, this looks very similar to what we saw in our carpet, right? Acetate, it's a cellulose plant-based fiber. It feels very much like silk. Acrylic, it's a non-cellulose fiber, and this is made out of natural gas and petroleum. This is why when we think that we have to get rid of all gas and natural gas products, it would be very difficult because so many things are made out of acrylic. We have wool like sweaters. We use a lot of acrylic in draperies. It's in carpet, outdoor upholstery furniture. So you wouldn't think of that vinyl furniture. It's shocking. Now, nylon, another non-cellulose, is very strong. It's very silky. Like if your nylon fabric can be very silky, and it's also water resistant. You think of it, one of those windbreakers. So it can also be used in drapery and upholstery. Olefin, this is this is also very eco-friendly, lightweight, resistant to stains. You find this mixed in with carpet a lot of the time. It's moisture and chemical. It's moisture, and it resists moisture and chemicals. So it's used a lot for drapery and wall covering, and it is it's usually an additive. Polyester, once again, very strong. We use this in draperies as well. And what's great is it resists mold, and it's very abrasive resistance. And it can stretch. It has stretching ability. And then rayon, once again, that's made out of wood pulp. It's very silk-like. So that is often substituted for curtains and draperies and upholstery. So if you want more of a silk look, rayon would be the way. So these are some of the main fibers that we use for our curtains mainly, and various furniture. Now, when we're looking at fiber, we want to look at some of the impacts on fiber and fabrics, the color fastness. How they resist, how they resist to color. Okay. And there are various tests that we do to see, if they fade and so forth. We're looking also for flammability resistance, the ability of a fiber to resist flame spread. We talked about wool that happens naturally, and also abrasion resistance. How does it handle abrasion? Can it be set on? When I'm doing booth fabrics, I want to make sure I use 100 double rubs. This is the Wassenbach test. That it shows that how much abrasion resistance fabric has by double rubs. And the physical property of the fabric. Does it retain its shape, or is it flexible? Do you need it to be rigid? So when we're looking at fabrics, we're not only looking at, is it a natural fiber? Is it a manufactured fiber? We're looking at how does it hold color, what's the flammability, how abrasion resistant it is, and how the physical properties, how does it feel? There's finishes that can be applied to your fabrics as well. It can be antibacterial, antimicrobial, where that, so to resist bacteria, mold resistant, flame resistant, or flame retardant. Now, the problem is if you put this flame retardant material on it, sometimes it actually changes the color. You can also put a moth resistant type of a finish on there to keep it from being moth proof, and also stain resistance. We see that all the time in carpets, and then even water repellents or water resistant. So in addition to this, a designer can actually specify a specific finish to either bring their fabric up to code or to the performance that they want. Now, we're also considering, we're designers. What are we really looking at most of the time? I'm looking at the color, the pattern, and the texture, right? That's kind of my go-to. First I'm looking at that color, and I want to make sure, okay, this is the fabric I'm going to use. It's called Krypton, and I know that, or vinyl. But then I'm looking at the pattern, color, and texture, right? So those are part of our elements, and that's why we go to those first, right? So color, we have our primary colors. We have 1 million of those. The patterns, you say, okay, I know I'm going with the primary colors, but now I got to think of how you're going to make that into a pattern. And are you going to weave in texture into this this texture into this pattern or into this fabric. So these are the things we have to think about as well. So many. Now, remember those warm colors. We know those warm colors, but what do they convey? Warm colors convey a very informal kind of contemporary look. They're very stimulating and dynamic, and they advance space. So we know that they make spaces come more in and intimate. Right? We got those warmer, kind of glowy. We talked about this in color theory. Those cool colors, see how bright, they're very tranquil, relaxing. They make the space look larger where this is kind of closed in, right? Very formal, a little more traditional. We're going to kind of dive into just a little bit of pattern and then wrap this up. But when you are mixing patterns, there is a rule of thumb. And you want really no more than one big, bold pattern, okay? So then you take one big, bold pattern, and then you have support patterns. So you might have a smaller pattern that is a smaller scale. And then you might have like a couple that are smaller scale and then maybe a solid. So it's really important that you have one large pattern that dominates. And what I like to do is actually pull colors from the dominant pattern and then match it. So that's how you get it to coordinate. Even though they're not the same subject matter, you have the various patterns that support one another. Remember that elements of design, we've got abstract and geometric patterns and naturalistic and stylized patterns. Now, abstract and geometrics are a little bit more informal and can be contemporary or more informal, where when you have naturalistic and stylized, these tend to be more formal. So in our textiles, as we are specifying, we also have to decide, is my interior kind of formal or is it more informal? Is it more modern or is it more stylized? Contemporary styles too in textures. Those rough, more natural textures, leather, they tend to be more informal. And then when you're going with the smooth and the silky and the velvets, those tend to be more traditional. And you'll see that this kind of goes with texture in general. Rough textures tend to be more naturalistic and more informal, and smooth textures like marble tend to be more formal. So it goes without saying that's true with your fabrics. We want to watch this little video and then we're going to wrap it up. So I hope you like it.
Right, mixing patterns can be overwhelming. Clearly, I'm overwhelmed right now by patterns. You can either mix way too many patterns, too many colors, and if you mix them all together wrong, you'll end up looking like you're schizophrenic and bossy. But if you do it right, then you'll end up looking like somebody that's just effortlessly chic. Obviously, that's what we want. So today I have 4 tips of how to mix patterns where it looks really beautiful and collected and effortless, but at the same time, still coordinated. First tip is to edit your color palette. So right now there's 95 million colors behind me and we want to get it down to 3 to 4. So my colors today are going to be hot pink, blue with hits of yellow. All the rest I'm going to get rid of. So I've edited down the color palette to 3 colors. Now it's time for tip number 2, which is to mix the scale of the patterns. For instance, these 2 patterns are both large scale patterns and they're fighting with each other. They're competing and they're too similar to be next to each other. But if you get rid of one of those and instead bring in a smaller scale pattern, then your eye can actually differentiate the 2. I have a bit of a rule that if you can squint your eyes and still see the difference between the 2 patterns, then they're different enough. But if you can't, then they're too similar. For instance, these 2. Very large and in charge patterns, way too similar. So your eye doesn't know what to look at. They're fighting with each other. Instead, get rid of one of them and bring in a small scale pattern. And obviously these work way better together. So just having a cohesive color palette isn't good enough. You also need to make sure you have the right mix of scales. So now I'm going to take that rule and apply it to all the pillows behind me.
we've mixed up our scales. We have a large scale floral, and medium scale floral, small scale stripe, medium scale polka dot. Technically, we've mixed up our scales, but we have too many patterns, which leads me to tip number 3. Limit the amount of patterns on your sofa to 2 or 3, and in one room, 3 to 5. This is too many patterns. What I'm going to do is edit a little bit more, add in some solids instead to give your eye a little bit of a rest. Ooh, very hot. And what's good about these is they have texture. They're not just a solid, so they're white, but at the same time adding some sort of depth. Okay, now we're down to 2 patterns, perfect, and 2 solids. But tip number 4 is that you shouldn't have all of your patterns together. Instead, they should be evenly distributed around the room. So right now I have 2 patterns over here and then over here. Clearly that's a problem because this has just so much more visual weight and this corner is a lot busier. And this can apply to your entire room, by the way, not just a sofa. So I'm going to move one of these patterns over here. So here's what we have, folks. We have a consistent color palette, mixing up scales, only 2 patterns on the sofa. That's perfect. And lastly, we have distributed the patterns evenly, so they're not all clumped in one corner. 4 tips to mixing patterns where it looks effortless, but at the same time coordinated.
Okay, so that did it. That is wraps up this very long lecture on windows, window treatments, a little bit about textures and the fabric that you should just be thinking about and selecting, and then finally wrapping up on patterns and how to mix those. So I know that's a lot, but we have covered chapter 11, which just is all the finishes that interior designers really need to consider when we're going forward. Hope you enjoyed this series and take care. See you next time.